if you ask the layman on the street, what can one do about the energy transition and achieving net zero and becoming carbon neutral, the answer will probably be, well, to eat less meat and to fly less with airplanes. But the simple truth is, based on the facts that I've just described, is that net zero will remain a pipe dream if we do not address industrial heat.
Hello and welcome to Energy Unplugged by Aurora. This podcast features various experts from Aurora having in-depth conversations with key industry leaders, policymakers and academics from all over the world. It explores the hottest topics across the energy market and gives a unique perspective on major energy issues.
Welcome to Energy Unplugged. My name is Hans Koenig. I lead Aurora's consulting business in our Berlin office, and I'm very pleased to be joined today by Christian Thiel, CEO of EnergyNest.
Hello.
Welcome, Christian. Before we go into the details and what we'll discuss today, let me briefly introduce our guest today. So, as I said, Christian is CEO of EnergyNest. EnergyNest is a high-temperature energy storage company, and Christian will explain what they do and how that works in a second. He started his career at BMW, where he simultaneously completed an apprenticeship and a degree in business at university. And he later added a PhD in economics and marketing, focusing on designing sales structures in foreign markets, which is something that presumably comes in quite useful in his current role. After 9 years at BMW, he left first to go into investment banking at UBS and then joined McKinsey, the consulting firm. After 3 years of that, he joined Senvion, one of the major wind turbine manufacturers at the time, as their vice president for business development and marketing. And after that, 7 years ago, in 2014, he joined EnergyNest. So quite a long and varied career in a number of sectors, but including the energy sector. So it's really great to have you, Christian, and I'm looking forward to our conversation.
Thanks very much for having me at the show, Hans.
We like to start our conversations on a bit of a personal note. And the thing that stood out to me in your CV, as it were, is that prior to studying, you were actually a paratrooper and in the German military, including a deployment to Kosovo. Could you tell us a bit about that time and whether that in any way shaped the way you do things in business?
Yeah, so those were the wild times back then. And I joined the army, specifically the paratroopers, after high school. I guess I didn't feel ready yet for university, or the most serious aspect of life. And I think our mission in ex-Yugoslavia was to enforce the Dayton Agreement after the war, which was ultimately preparing for the first democratic elections, providing food or rations to the people, and collecting some so-called war criminals and bringing them to trial, or basically the local law enforcement. So overall, I thought it was fun, but it turned out to be a very serious mission. And what happens when you're in the army typically is you grow up a lot, a lot more than you would have probably without. So it was a big step for me in my career, would I say. And why am I saying this? Because when you learn one thing at the armed forces, it's about leadership, and leadership doesn't just start when you're a general or so, right? So it starts basically as soon as you're responsible for a mission of some people in your group, or even more. And the things that I have taken away is the first one, maybe more a metaphor, but always use your compass, right? In the army, it was a literal compass to not lose orientation when you're in an unfamiliar environment. And I think, that probably applies more than ever today. It's not the literal compass anymore, but it's more like the gut compass. It's all about direction, right? Is where you're headed, is that in line with the mission that you have to achieve? So I think kind of like this calibration, if you're on the right track, is always super important. And then what I took away also is teamwork but teamwork always starts a bit also with leadership, which is not a beauty contest, but it's more about engaging your team and getting all input. And more than input, also getting everyone involved in teamwork. And once you have people involved, it's about really determining direction and providing orientation on direction, so that people really know where they headed, where we are headed as a group, and what the achievement is. And I think that is something that I really internalized during the time at the Army. And then last but not least, obviously, something that I find very important, especially in the business world, is when the going gets tough, you just have to bite your teeth and get through with it. Yeah, there are situations that are never really comfortable, and you can choose to complain and whine about how difficult everything is, or you can just bite your teeth and just get on with it and strive towards the light at the end of the tunnel.
Maybe one follow-up question on that. How do you strike the balance between checking the compass and biting the bullet? Because when something is tough, it might be because you're heading in the wrong direction, right? Or it might be that, okay, actually you just have to double down and you have to keep going, and there's a light at the end of the tunnel. And I can imagine that being quite hard in both a military context and, of course, in a business context as well.
Yeah, so I would assume there's different answers to this, but my answer is not to just trust your internal compass in isolation, but to always, check with the externals. That is basically, something like, reading the news on, watching your environment, talking to your team, talking to the leaders who are responsible for you. So, for instance, investors or stakeholders such as customers, etc. And then just reflecting and really finding out what preferences shapes up. And even if there's many obstacles, if you're completely determined and if others are also determined, it's very easy to align on direction. So I would say it's not a simple recipe. It has a lot to do with reflection and evaluation, and this in a constant loop. Yeah.
Pretty good point. Thank you.
Sometimes, and sometimes it's not just biting the bullet, but also dodging a bullet or two.
That's also true, definitely. So after the military, you spent almost 10 years at BMW before then moving on to UBS and McKinsey. What made you move away from industry?
Yeah. So first of all, I think I was attracted to the industry because obviously, industry comes up with great products and also strong brands, etc. I decided for myself after, an overall, let's say, 10 years during university, during which I had been a full-time employee, so to say, already, and then, before that apprenticeship, and then my first real job for several years, that the culture was too stiff for me. Yeah, I would say this is the simple answer or the headline. And I always had the impression in the places where I worked in the industry that you have great colleagues, but it's not always a place where you're valued for out of the box thinking or ideas. Yeah. So a lot of time the feedback that I got is basically, you have to fall in line and you have to be, don't care about what's left or right, etc. And also, there was always a sentiment that you had to be extremely thankful for having this job instead of really talking about, contributions or ideas or just what moves you as a human being. So I decided that was, after a while, this is simply nothing for me. Again, this is very personal. And then, I just chose to pursue a different path. Yeah, being very appreciative for the learnings though I have made during this time.
Okay, and why then investment banking and strategy consulting? Is this was that the largest possible contrast you could imagine to the structures in industry?
It was probably driven out of curiosity to broaden the horizon. So just not to know about one company in particular, down to level 23, but more, okay, what's happening in the world? And by world, I mean, obviously different geographies, but also different sectors. So it was really driven out of curiosity, and it felt good to kind of like, just experience that life is not just about automobiles or production processes and brand marketing, but that there's many different aspects to it. Yeah, I'm simplifying now, but I think probably it suited my profile just to wanting to broaden experiences. And typically in consulting, you work on different projects, also investment banking, you work on different transactions. So it's those are good platforms just to get out there and gain some valuable experiences.
Absolutely. And then finally, on your career, how did you then get involved in EnergyNest, and how did you become the CEO?
I think a lot of things added up. Having industrial experience and then working in different countries and then in the energy segment / renewable segment, you become aware of the direction of travel with regards to, for instance, energy transition and what's missing. And that was and still is storage for a large part. And then as it is in life, there's always opportunity that presents itself, and that was EnergyNest. And EnergyNest happened to look for a new CEO at the time, 3 years after it was founded, and I just took the chances and turned out to stick for the company for more than 7 years now.
Yeah, I mean, which is a long time in the energy world, especially looking at.
Yeah, and it. Yeah, exactly. And it doesn't feel like it, because it's not like you're coming to work every morning. It's more like it's going from milestone to milestone. And we started with an idea and that of our founder, and then the next step was to form partnerships and then build a pilot, which we did in Masdar City in Abu Dhabi, a technology pilot, then operating this and seeing if the technology really works, and then based on the success of the pilot, starting commercial evaluations, thinking about segmentation and which kind of customers we could approach and what skills it needs with the team, and yada 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 yada. And there we are now with 3 projects under execution at the moment. Just posted on LinkedIn this morning a picture from our first tower of power, so to say, and working off a quite significant project pipeline. So yeah, it's you develop along the transformation of the company, which I personally find incredibly exciting. You're in a space of growth, and you see not only yourself develop, but also colleagues you started out with or you hired, and people are just developing, and you do new things and want to do more and determine what resources are necessary to get there, and progress is nice. I think this is what makes the 7 years fly by like nothing.
Absolutely. And so, I mean, you already told us a little bit about what you're up to at the moment, but in order to not get ahead of ourselves, can you explain to us how the EnergyNest technology works and where you see its role in the energy transition?
Yeah, I think it's important to understand that what we do at EnergyNest, first of all, is addressing the single biggest lever of decarbonization, which is industrial heat. We have a couple of applications. I would say the most relevant include, for instance, waste heat recovery via energy storage, or electrifying heat directly. So renewable green electricity converted into green heat for industrial steam grids. Or, for instance, also flexibilization of power plants, so zero emission power plants. And it's also important to understand that what we do has been estimated by Mission Innovation, which is I think it's a body or organization formed by all the countries that signed the Paris 2015 agreement plus the EU. So our technology impact has been estimated to save 100 million tons CO2 per year or more. Yeah, just to get an understanding of what it does. I mean, in simple word on the technology, if I may just add to this, is we have a solid state energy storage technology, which comes in standardized and modular container-sized modules. If you may borrow this term again. Size is a 20-foot shipping container, and it's basically a massive heat exchanger with the capacity to store heat. So heat gets in, is stored very effectively and efficiently and on a low-cost basis, and then freely dispatchable again. And the main, let's say, ingredients of our thermal battery technology are basically steel and a high-performance concrete, where I have to mention that the majority of the concrete is not cement, but it's quartzite. So 75% roundabout is quartzite. So it's quite geographically abundant materials that we are using, and also therefore it's highly recyclable. And I think what we want to strive to with this kind of technology is to provide not just energy storage, but more move into a space for clean heat as a service. Yeah, just to give it a headline business-wise already. Where we see our role in the energy transition is simple, and just adding on to the significance and why this matters. I mean, many people are not aware that 30% of the global energy demand is driven by the industrial sector. And the majority of this industrial heat is generated by fossil fuels, so 90% at least. And that's actually quite scary, yeah? And it shows you why we have to transition industrial heat completely and define also a new target state. So it's two main objectives that we have to achieve. And in that context also, if you ask the layman on the street, what can you do about, or what can one do about the energy transition and achieving net zero and becoming carbon neutral, the answer will probably be, well, to eat less meat and to fly less with airplanes. But the simple truth is, based on the facts that I've just described, is that net zero will remain a pipe dream if we do not address industrial heat. And we do this by flexibilizing heat that is in systems already, in industrial systems. So basically you have a byproduct waste heat, which is not being utilized. We offer a way of utilizing this waste heat and converting this byproduct into a primary energy source. So for instance, for certain processes requiring steam or even electricity. And what we also do is we electrify heat, as already mentioned, for industrial customers. So instead of, and let me just talk in pictures, which is probably easier to comprehend. Instead of, let's say, burning natural gas to produce the much needed industrial steam, we basically help customers electrifying green electricity, and electricity is not always green and it's not always cheap. So we shave these supply peaks basically off, store them in the thermal battery, and make it then accessible on demand for these customers in order to utilize green electricity for heat potential. And we think that this heat storage sector / industrial sector / power plant flexibilization is a clean tech space with huge potential for growth. And maybe my last word of towards where our role is in the energy transition is, everyone knows Netflix as the streaming platform, and you could refer to basically Netflix as the EnergyNest of entertainment. So we want to be, in other words, the Netflix for industrial heat, really a streaming platform for industrial heat on demand, with a clear customer value. Also, let's say, enabling the customer not to bind extreme amounts of capital into these solutions. But I guess we come to this, Hans.
Yeah, I mean, very happy to actually dig a bit deeper here, because I really like the picture of a Netflix for industrial heat, and I guess that's part of the process of you turning into a turnkey solutions provider and not just a technology company. Can you tell us a little bit about why you expanded into that into that very operational business as well?
Yeah, I mean, that's a good question. And the answer is simply based on our learnings. With our solution, we do not address households or, let's say, individual, let's say, end customers. We address the industrial sector, so industrial companies with production plants, with manufacturing units and power plants. And we want to make decarbonization for them as easy as possible. We have realized in earlier stages when talking about projects, I mean, that was basically before our recent funding, that capital is a constraint for many companies, despite the many, let's say, opportunities to be part of EU recovery funds, etc., based on the COVID situation and economical support for companies. But there's a global trend that companies are focusing their core business on their core products. Mm-hmm. And that, in many cases, is not energy infrastructure. Yeah, energy infrastructure is driven by large utilities and transmission companies, etc. So we came in a situation where we, developed a project with a customer, and the customer said, it's really great, but I have a budget for next year already allocated for, let's say, upgrading our SAP system. And for the year after, we can talk, but there's already ideas for improving the quality of our core products, etc. So to cut a long story short, we ran into situations where the contribution of our project was highly valued, but the customer could not really execute on it due to financial bottlenecks. And this is what we're addressing with our fully financed turnkey solutions, is to ultimately enable customers to go for our solutions, to not having to pay for the hardware or project capex for it, and to participate in energy savings from day one. So ultimately, our solution basically would be built, we finance it, and there's a certain amount of savings. Let's say there's €1 a year that you can save. Then we have a discussion with a customer about how many cents of this euro he can earn straight away, and how many cents of the euro basically go to pay down the project because we have built the project. So it completely changes the picture of these discussions, and CFOs love this, yeah, because it's a big enabler for them to implement such projects, to decarbonize their operations, and to keep the financial flexibility for the core products that they have, or the core activities. And as I said, in many cases, this is not energy infrastructure, and this is exactly where our new offering comes into play.
Really interesting, really interesting. There's clearly a big opportunity there in terms of decarbonizing industrial heat. However, I think it's also fair to say that you're not the only company active in this space, but that you do have I don't know if you call them competitors, but there's companies developing steel storage and molten salt and a couple of other different storage media as well. Yeah. And besides the contracting business model which you described, how do you differentiate yourselves from them?
Yeah, I have to say, it's very confidence inspiring for us that we do have peers or competitors. Let's refer to those players as peers for now, because I mean I cannot repeat this enough. I mean, if you take, I spoke about global energy demand by industry, but if you take the European market alone and the emission level from the industry in Europe. The European industry emits 20% of Europe's greenhouse gases, 20%, so 1/5. That is more than, emissions from all planes and cars combined. Yeah, just in terms of perspective.
Yeah.
And with with some clever hardware and operations, you can significantly change that. And this is really why I'm so happy to see an increased momentum also from other players on this. I think when it comes down to the question what differentiates EnergyNest from its peers, I think we are, at least for now, the only ones in the space addressing the heat market with a market-ready product. I think other players are in trial stages, which are super important in order to bring your product to market. We have currently 3 projects in execution. So that means we are doing work at site. And our customers are great customers. It's Yara. Many people don't know Yara, but it's the largest fertilizer producer in the world. So a big chemical company. It's the Italian energy company ENI, and we just recently signed a contract and started executing the project for a project with Avery Dennison, a large global manufacturing company for packaging materials. So it's a project in executions. I would say then, following these milestones, I just have to mention our pipeline, which is focusing on industrial projects, but also on leapfrog projects. So projects that are in the magnitude of, let's say, several dozen up to hundreds of our modules. So really big, large scale projects. And for both, we also have formed partnerships, for instance, with AC Boilers in Italy, or on a more European level, also with Siemens Energy, in order to develop joint solutions for industrial customers and their thermal storage needs. So I think that probably the commercialization aspect of EnergyNest and the current market traction, which is a function of customer demand and really getting operational into the business and delivering milestones, is something really that differentiates us. And next year we'll have those 3 projects in operation, and we'll be working on many more projects. And just last week, I was in Spain at an industrial customer to discuss one of the possible next projects that we're working on.
Okay. So really the degree of commercialization and how far you are along that process as a key differentiator from others in the space. So let's follow up on that. And I was wondering, could you tell us a little bit about what you learned in executing these first projects? Are there any things that that you will do very differently in the fourth project than you did them in the first 3 based on experience you made?
Yeah, I think we learned that we still have to lower the barriers for decarbonization. And I think that has several angles. One of them certainly is to offer financed projects. So not only to sell your hardware, but to sell, the engineering around it, the financing around it, and just make adoption for the customer as easy as possible. Then one thing we learned is that we still have to educate a lot of customers about the possibility of thermal storage. So there's a complete information gap on the heat market. And I'm just referring to the numbers that I threw you away earlier, Hans, about 1/3 of global energy demand and 20% of European greenhouse gas emissions. Many don't know this, also because the media is portraying, let's say, a different angle. It's still a lot about EVs and charging infrastructure and photovoltaic on the roof, which is all important and good, but it won't get us to the climate targets, right? Especially now after COP26, seeing that we look at a coal phase down and not a coal phase out. I mean, it's important to address the big levers. And then I think a very operational learning, what we've also have done is, probably projects always take a bit more time than you anticipate in your planning, which is just, reality then catching up with, let's say, companies going through committees for decision, or the weather not allowing for construction start and stuff like this. So I would say these are probably the key learnings that we have made from the first projects.
In terms of taking forward the business and growing it over the next couple of years, is there a merit order of use cases, or to put it in a different way, are there any no-brainers you see which should be addressed in the short term, and is there then a long list of very interesting but potentially more challenging use cases?
Yeah, that's a good question. First of all, I have to say that I'm really happy to see that, the 3 projects that we have currently in execution already address different applications or segments. Waste heat recovery, solar thermal for industrial production, or steam balancing for Yara. So it's good that, some of the segments that we target actually gain traction. I think a definite no-brainer, as you put it, is waste heat recovery with energy storage. So let's say an industrial company that has any sort of kiln or oven or smelter, or it doesn't have to be gas fired, can also be electricity powered, like electric arc furnaces, etc. With these, those are energy sources, especially in terms of waste heat. To tap into this waste heat, recover this waste heat, store it, and then make it accessible downstream for different process steps to, for instance, replace natural gas boilers. That's an absolute no-brainer. And
what kind of temperature level do you need for that, just out of interest?
The temperature can be up to what it is. We would typically tap into sources that are, I would say, at least 180 degrees Celsius.
Mm-hmm.
But then there's no limit. It can be, also 1200 degrees or so. We would dilute the heat in so far that what enters the storage is probably around max 430 degrees Celsius.
Okay.
And then store this temperature. And this is typically what you need for high quality steam provision or preheating, or even electricity generation for, let's say, on-site demand. Yeah. So that is an absolute no-brainer, also simply because utilizing waste heat just saves you a massive energy bill, especially with today's gas prices. Such applications are strongly in the money.
Yeah.
I think second, any sort of solar thermal application that we see, catching the sun during the day and making it available in terms of its energy for the night is it's a very well-used metaphor for this. But I was quite surprised about the project that we just assigned and are now executing for Avery Dennison. It's ultimately a project in Belgium where solar collectors provide industrial heat to the customer. And and this is in Belgium, so we're not talking MENA region or south of Spain, right? We talk about Central Europe, and until recently, I wasn't aware this is possible, but it is. Technology is really advancing, and the solar collector themselves during the day are able to, I think, replace almost the entire natural gas consumption of the customer, and with our thermal battery. This will amount to 70% of the nighttime gas demand. So it's big impact. Yeah. If you just put this into perspective, what we can do on big project level, and just imagine this in a scaled out version, and just again, 1/3 of the global energy for industry, and just making this energy recycled or from tapping into renewable sources. This is the answer for the industrial sector, really. And so this is also a new, really a rather low-hanging fruit to combine solar thermal generation with storage. And then there is the electrification of industrial heat. So for instance, flexible charging from the grid. You take green renewable electricity when it's available, store it, and then make it accessible. And this can all be customized to the customer, whatever the needs are for green steam production, for instance. This is less of a technical challenge because the technology is well understood. This is more of a, let's say, regulatory challenge because of levies and surcharges. So the storage today, for instance, in Germany, is still treated like an end consumer, yeah, which it should be clearly not. So that makes it a bit more difficult, the electrification of industrial heat from a regulatory point of view. But technically, it's not a challenge. And when I say technically it's not a challenge, I should say also that for our projects that are integrated with industrial plants, it's our storage. But then, depending on the application, it's always in conjunction with off-the-shelf industry equipment like heat exchangers, steam generators, small turbines, foundations, piping. I mean, none of this is new except for the thermal battery, and the thermal battery is not so new also because it's proven we are executing projects for the first customer. So it's basically stuff that we can realize today. We don't have to wait for the next leap of innovation for another 10 years. Yeah. So now it's about moving the regulatory work into the direction to enable the technologies to function across all possible applications to the benefit not only of the customers but society at large.
Yeah. You mentioned the regulatory work. What is it that you need from policy or regulation to make more projects fly? Is it subsidies? Is it higher carbon prices? Do you have any suggestions there?
Yeah, so I think, for instance, you have to differentiate. So, for instance, for waste heat recovery, as I mentioned, I mean, with current gas prices and carbon at about 60 euro, this is largely in the money already without any sort of subsidies. And I think the more expensive carbon gets, the more interesting for our type of applications, yeah, because the economical return will just be much more attractive. I think for making decarbonization more easy for customers to adopt, policies need to be adjusted, and politics specifically need to introduce a very simple kind of system. Now, I'm not a policy expert, I have to say, but there needs to be somewhat of a balance between penalties for, greenhouse gas emitting processes, and at the same time, incentives for companies who implement technologies or innovation to mitigate this greenhouse gas emission. Yeah. So that needs to be more a balance. And as I said, for instance, in taking the German example again, if energy storage is still treated as the ultimate energy consumer with all the taxes and levies, this obviously doesn't make electrification super attractive from a business case from the get-go. So I think someone really has to think about some sort of carrot and a stick scenario in order to really move away from these high emission levels for the industry and really help the sector transitioning and to define a new target end state. Because we also see that a lot of customers are waiting. There's a strong insecurity about what legislation will be next, and there's a lack of orientation. And if you have lost orientation or are a bit confused or unsure, you simply do not dare to take bold next steps. And I think that clarity needs to be provided.
Okay, yeah. So you mentioned that at current gas prices and carbon prices, you're already competitive, but of course on the gas markets, we're seeing a pretty unusual situation at the moment.
Yeah.
Do you have a rough estimate of what kind of carbon price you would need if natural gas goes down to, say, I don't know, 25 euros per megawatt hour again?
Yeah, I think around 80 probably is a level to say that CO2 is so attractive that these solutions carry themselves at such gas prices. But then again, mind you that even if prices go down again to that level, that then new current gas price level is not a hedge for the future. So
No.
there's also a strategic element to it, right? So yeah, I think 60 with current gas prices is already highly attractive. 80 with lower gas prices is more attractive, and then obviously our business model is thriving on increasing carbon prices because it simply provides customers and partners with a technology hedge against increasing natural gas prices. And our mission is clearly about replacing natural gas for industry customers. I mean, we want to help the industry and our customers to first transition and then to define, and implement a technology setup that is fit for the future and ideally runs without gas.
Great stuff. Final question on your business models and on your positioning. I would like to widen the scope a little bit in terms of the competition, because right now clearly the main source of competition is natural gas. In the longer term, a lot of the debate about high temperature heat in industrial processes is around hydrogen versus electrification. And by the sounds of it, you are more on the electrification side here. But can you tell us a little bit how you position yourselves there, and whether you view hydrogen as a competitor in the processes which you want to work on?
Yeah, so you really opened the can of worms there, Hans. I also have to say I'm not a hydrogen expert, but you do hear the noise, and I think what hydrogen and the hydrogen lobby is doing is great public work. I think the danger of what is being done is that people might perceive that hydrogen is the answer to everything, which in our view it is clearly not. So if for instance, wasted recovery is wasted recovery, and you should always enhance energy efficiency in a plant when you can. And I think that this is not in competition with hydrogen by any way. But if we talk, for instance, about the electrification of the industry, I think this is also what you had in mind, right? You could argue, but from this renewable electricity, one could just produce hydrogen, and that is true. And what we see also with customers, for instance, that we work with together, Yara is a big player in hydrogen and green ammonia production, is that there are certain sweet spots for hydrogen application. And there's a concept that I found quite useful to look at, which is the hydrogen ladder, so to say, which describes applications where hydrogen is simply unavoidable, because this is really what will help the energy transition and the future energy target state. And there are simply applications where hydrogen is uncompetitive, and this also needs to be faced, right? And I think the strong points of hydrogen is in the fertilizer production or methanol production, or powering the steel industry, at least in Europe, if we live in green steel, etc. Or shipping it can be an example. So there's dedicated applications. When we look to what we do, for instance, the electrification of the industry, where you would simply install a storage system at site with the customer. Let's take a chemical plant that needs steam in the steam grids. We would tap into the steam grids for providing the steam, and this steam would be generated from heat from our storage, and that heat would be generated from green electricity when it's available and cheap. So that's a benefit. And such a system, without going into many details, has an overall efficiency, so basically green electricity to green heat of over 90%. If you were, if you generate hydrogen from green electricity, the efficiency level is 60%, roughly roundabout. And this is if you look at IRENA numbers, so it's not my numbers. So there's applications where simply our storage sticks out in terms of overall efficiency gains. Plus, it's a much more, let's say, simple and therefore low-cost systems. So I think there is not necessarily a ultimate competition for select applications when it comes to thermal energy storage. I think hydrogen and thermal storage are both part of the energy transition and the future state. And I mean, let's face it, everyone who's informed about, the current energy challenges knows that a multitude of technologies is needed. There's not just one answer, right? And I think what we currently see is probably that there's an expectation raised that hydrogen is the answer to all. And I think that is wrong, right? But hydrogen certainly has its strong point, and so do we. And again, our waste heat recovery solutions, flexibilization of zero emission power plants and electrification of industries, I think are clearly EnergyNest strong points where we think we can deliver a massive contribution for the energy transition and for its customers.
Great stuff. Thank you very much. And before we come to a close, we have a tradition on this podcast of putting a couple of overrated and underrated questions to our guests. The idea here is that you answer perhaps in a word or perhaps a sentence, but not much more than that, to really get people to take a position on a couple of concepts and ideas. And the first I would like to put to you is the idea of starting your career at a large corporate. Overrated or underrated?
Probably overrated.
Okay. The second one is the role of hydrogen in the energy transition. We already talked about it a little bit.
Yeah, I think overrated, and hydrogen is crucial, but it's not the only solution, and certainly not for everything.
No. And the third one, the contribution of the COP summits to decarbonization.
I would have said initially overrated, but probably I would answer your question now with underrated, because I think despite some perhaps disappointing results, it's important to simply raise awareness and confront policymakers with such event in order to just simply keep the game moving. Otherwise, we would just be stalling.
No. And just for the sake of our listeners, we're recording this a couple of days after after COP in Glasgow closed, so we had the benefit of looking at what actually happened. Final question, and I guess this is a good one to conclude our entire conversation today. The ease with which heat can be decarbonized, overrated or underrated?
This is completely underrated. And it's probably less of a question of ease or doing it. It's probably more a question of awareness. So, and on that note, Hans, I'm very happy about the chances that you guys provide for speaking at your podcast, and just helping to educate also the energy world on, in our case, the topic of industrial heat. And thank you very much for having me today and for the opportunity to speak.
No, thank you very much for joining us. And yes, I hope we managed to convince a couple of our listeners today that this incredible challenge of addressing the emissions coming from the heat sector is actually a bit more manageable than one would have thought. So thank you very much, Christian, for joining us. Really interesting discussion, and looking forward to catching up soon.
Thank you, Hans.
That was Hans Koenig, Head of Commission Projects for Central Europe at Aurora, speaking to Christian Thiel, CEO of EnergyNest. Do keep an eye on our podcast feed for more in-depth conversations with senior members of the energy industry. The best way to do this is to subscribe on whatever platform you use. Thanks for listening, and goodbye.